Woe, frolic, dread, and malice. How can a person's job be tied to these four tempers? What kind of job requires literal brain surgery so that the person cannot remember what they do when they go home? Hello and welcome to Road Goes Ever On and On. Today, Mark and I are looking at these questions as we discuss the third episode of the hit Apple TV show, Severance. Spoilers ahead. And if you're as hooked with this show as we are, and you don't want to miss one of our weekly breakdowns, please be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for notifications. With that being said, Mark, I don't quite want to call it a theory. It's basically, I've connected a number of dots. I haven't taken it all the way to the end.
Okay.
But I've connected a number of dots. And
Let's jump right into it.
I thought that you would appreciate it. Okay, so this takes us back to the painting that is inside of the wellness center. With that being said, do you think you have any clue what I'm talking about, or no?
Well,
No. Okay.
I'm gonna say no. No.
That's all right. So in the painting, there were four things. In this episode, when they're in the Perpetuity Wing, we hear a quote from Ker Egan. And the quote talks about the four tempers: woe, frolic, dread, and malice.
And that's him taming the tempers.
That is him taming the tempers. And it even says, it even has a comment about, like, he went into the cave and tamed the tempers. But it gets crazier than that. So you can, if you look at the picture, you can definitely see, like, Frolic is probably the jester, right? You know, Dread, I don't know, that's probably
the old lady.
The goat that's like, I think that might be like, whoa. I think Dread might be the goat that looks like it's about to be hit by the cat o' nine tails and looks scared. Who knows? It doesn't really matter. I'm pretty sure those are the four tempers. I'm pretty sure that's him taming it. But here's the more important thing. Four tempers.
Right.
Their computers have four boxes that they sort the numbers into.
So they're taming the four tempers.
One of the boxes, like, one set of numbers elicits, they say fear. I think that fear is basically dread.
Okay.
So they're definitely, I think that is one of them. And then Mark started to say that they aren't all fear, and it sounded like he was going to say, like, you know, at least one of them is even good, you know, and that would be Frolic.
Right.
So I think that these elicit emotional responses other than just fear. I think the four things they elicit are woe, frolic, dread, and malice. It does in this quote kind of say that you can, you know, by figuring out the balance of each of these in a person, that you can, you know, basically kind of like measure out their soul, something along those lines. So I think that each of those files is related to a person, and that they are somehow weighing out the proportion of each of those that are inside of an individual person. I don't know what the end game of this is. I don't have anything more fleshed out, so it's not like I got to the end, but I feel like I've connected some important dots along the way.
They are using the data refinement, the DRM management, to figure these things out in, we'll say, people. I'm assuming that it's people. The different files are probably people. What if they are testing out or trying to figure out how to make the severance for each person, like the way that it is, like, severs each person, like they're responsible for figuring out the woe, the frolic in a person, to figure out exactly what severance chip, what needs to happen to the severance chip before it can go into someone.
That's definitely an interesting thought.
I feel like you hit it perfectly on the head. The other thing is, okay, so I guess the number 4 pops up a lot because there's 4 of them as well. Like, I wonder if each one of them represents one of the four woes. So, like, I would say Dylan is Frolic.
Oh yeah, Dylan's definitely Frolic.
I would say Penny is Dread.
Oh,
Irv,
yeah.
Irv is Woe. Because he's always, like, worried about... But Mailce, I wouldn't say Mark is Mailce. So I don't... Maybe that's wrong.
It's still a decent idea, but so I definitely think that's interesting what you said about them figuring out people in order to be able to figure out how to sever them, because it does seem like they might want to roll this program out on an even larger
Right.
scale. I did wonder whether or not this had anything to do with, you know, this episode has a lot to do with like perpetuity, so
Right.
going on forever. So I didn't know if some of it had to do with like cheating death somehow.
So...
And we do see a bunch of, you pointed out that there were what looked like clones in the intro,
Right.
you know, because like there's the one Audi mark in like the PJs, and then a lot of what look kind of like copies of any mark.
Well, and the
So-
Eagans themselves look very similar. I know they're all related. You know, I did mention the clone theory way back when, but I was wondering if they were making clones of the Egan, because the other guy, James Egan, he is looking like he's older. What if they are trying to make one of the, like, the next CEO, or I wonder if we already know who is lined up to be the next CEO. And part of me wonders if Mrs. Selvig, you know, she has a little bit like the gray hair, like all the other Eagans. The other interesting thing about the Eagans statues that I noticed, if you look at like the time that they were CEO, when a lot of them, I think at least 4 or 5 had their end of their CEO year was the same year they died. And then there was like 2 other ones that only lived, the longest one that lived after their CEO was 2 years. Everyone else died within a year or the same year they were CEO.
Interesting. Here's another thing to kind of chew on with this company and with the Perpetuity Wing. So Irving makes a comment about the fact that he's so happy that he's working for a company that's been something like serving people since 1866.
Right.
Which the biggest thing that I can think of from 1866 is the Civil Rights Act of 1866. You know, so this is an important part in the end of slavery, and it does feel like there are some ties to slavery in this. Like there's
Right.
ethical questions about whether or not the people inside are somehow slaves. You know, is this something that they've been working on to be able to kind of continue that forced labor with people who potentially willingly give themselves up?
Right.
If you wait for the right circumstances and then create these right kind of situations where the people on the outside don't know how terrible it is for the people on the inside, and so they just keep coming back, not knowing what they're subjecting themselves to.
You know, one thing I thought about, we talked about how splitting his memories was like an escape from his wife's death, right? But to me, that doesn't... Okay, so if the Audi Mark thinks about his wife's passing, right? And he goes to work. He can't use work to block it out, right? Like, he can't distract himself with something. So it's like he has to think about it. He goes to work, and it's like nothing, no time goes by, and he's back out thinking about it. It's like he has no distraction from it. So is that even better to sever your memories?
I kind of wondered whether or not it was like the sleep portion. No, you don't know that you sleep, but you feel the beneficial aspects of being restored. So whether or not he's not, when he's outie Mark, he's always aware of his wife, and he's not aware of any Mark, so he doesn't get to experience not remembering about his wife.
Right.
But in my head, I think that part of his rationalization is by his body not thinking about it for 8 hours a day, that he at least comes out of that elevator feeling somewhat restored. Like the
Okay.
any Mark is taking care of his mental health. But I think that even if that was my original thought process, I think that Petey kind of showed that that's not the case. They made jokes about the fact that, he had an elevator allergy, because he would always come in with red eyes and that he
Right.
carried that sadness with him.
So that brings up a great quote that was in the Perpetuity Wing, and I don't know if you saw that quote. It said, "History lives in us, whether we learn it or not," and that's his history. So it's like that. I thought that was a very neat way. Like, we had Petey earlier in the episode talking about you always carried it with you, and then like Egan basically saying that your history, it's already programmed inside you. Now, okay, speaking of programming and conditioning, I've mentioned before that I worked with animals, and a lot of that is with conditioning, operant conditioning, classical conditioning. Part of me thinks that the Perpetuity Wing, like a lot of this episode, we see Irv urging that Helly needs a sense of purpose. Going
Yeah.
back to that quote, it's like they're using the Lumon Eagan history in a way to like supplant their history, severed employees' history, to make them feel like they're part of this thing. They
Right.
use that
They
oh,
even kind of like reference the people that work there as family, so it seems like they're
right.
inducting them into this history.
Right, and I feel like it's part of that. Like they're conditioning them. They're making them feel like they are these people or the legacy of these people to keep them in. The other part that I was mentioning with Helly, when she has to read that statement, when she goes to the break room and she's reading that statement, to me, okay, so we talked about how could you hurt somebody without leaving any physical wounds, or how could you make the break room so terrifying or so
Right.
bad? And
I love this, by the way.
part of me thinks that this is they were conditioned, so they have these words, this statement that has been conditioned into their mind with this chip that creates this fear or pain inside of them, and that's the way they control them.
The interesting thing that so this is what I loved about that is that I feel like by leaving this up to audience interpretation, I think that allowing our imagination to fill in the gaps of why this is so horrible is so much stronger than making it extremely well defined and making it, because if you look at it kind of on the surface of like it just reading some words from a projector that's on there, but she's starting to look like she's like terrified and
Right.
sad, and it really looks like it's eliciting an emotional response, and a bad emotional response, which is amazing. And I love that. I think that, you know, I think that they, I originally thought, with the break room that they would beat them or sleep deprive them or something, like, who knows? But if I were to actually see any of those, I don't think that they would be as bad as this, where it's like you can see how it's affecting them, that it's horrifying. The fact that you don't understand it and you have to come up with something like that, and that might be it.
Right.
Or like you can take it a completely different way. You know, he was like turning a dial, and I didn't know if that
Right.
was like it had something to do with it. I don't know, but I love that they are letting us fill in the gaps, and I think it's so much scarier for it.
I do think the dial was him like gauging Helly because he hadn't put Helly in the break room before, and so what's ever in that chip, it starts out at a base level reading the statement, and then however her hands being on that table and the way that the light and I mean I don't know if it affects it or not, but I did find it interesting that he wore headphones to listen to her do it. You know, they weren't very far away from each other, so she could clearly they could hear each other. So why did he have to wear headphones?
This show is so great because it asks it has us asking so many questions, and one of the beautiful things that it does is it will let you ask a question that you may think that they haven't thought out.
Right.
But the show is a step ahead of you. And it when it catches you with that, it is absolutely brilliant. And kind of an example of that is like with the with the code detector.
Right.
I think that if you spent some time kind of thinking about the code detector from when we originally saw it, you very quickly would think that you're like poking some holes in it and be like, okay, well, why can't you just, why can't you use a literal code? It doesn't have to be characters, like she's doing. Like, why can't you split it up so it's not characters until it's combined? What if you put it inside of your body? I feel like they very specifically withheld that.
Right.
So that it can allow you to feel like, okay, that's weird, but that doesn't seem that powerful. And then when it's kind of revealed, the different intricacies of it, it's like, holy crap, that's intense.
We did learn something though today about the code detectors. Just what we saw with Helly, but there's something else that we learned about the code detectors today.
What's that?
There is a way to get words down there. There is a way, whether it be they turn the code detectors off or there's a different route for messages to come through. And the reason we know this is they brought his book down.
The book.
The book came down. So there has to be a way to get information from the inside out or the outside in.
I wonder if that's like different cards give you different access. So it's like the people who are last names, like Miss Kolib, and Mr. Milchek. People like that it seem like they're not severed. If like their card allows them to, because I would think that an important part is like the flow of information back up.
Right.
Of like what they're doing, but it's wild and I love it.
Are you still thinking that Rickon is deep state?
Yeah. He's such a he's such a doofus. Like for somebody that's like a PhD, is like is he gonna like, should I creep there? And she's like, no, he's not home.
Yeah. Oh, what if?
But how do you know? Because his car isn't there. Well, what if he's playing hooky?
What if he played hooky? Oh, okay, go set it on the door, and he like sets it on the door.
No.
Should I set it here or here? It's like,
oh my god,
I don't care. Can we go? Just such a doofus.
And like this is perfect for like this. The kind of pretentious shit that he does is crazy. Like the dinnerless dinner, right? So he does that one. Imagine somebody being pretentious enough to write a biography about the reader.
Right. A philosophical view of you.
Of you.
So
the
dumb.
you that you are. Like,
The you that you are.
That is like such just a pretentious thing to try and like not write about a specific person, but like write about the reader. And it didn't seem like it was self-helpy.
No.
Like, I know that you can have books that are like like how to unlock your best. Like this seemed like it was about. Yeah, he's interesting unless it's all an act.
But who's that act for?
Because what if, I don't know, what if he is part of the they that helped to reintegrate Petey? Because we haven't seen who that group is.
I mean, it could be she was concerned. They were concerned about messages being in the book.
Right.
Which would be going to the Audi. So I don't like what message would be there. Like who would be on? Oh, she's probably looking for messages from Petey. I
think that's what she was looking for. Yeah.
That makes more sense. But then if she's looking for him, but she's also working with him, maybe.
I don't know.
But we did also find out her first name.
We did. We found a few of them.
Yeah. Harmony and Seth, I believe, is Mailce.
Yes.
And then there was that other girl. And I did really like how it got flipped on her. The way that it was on Mark with the speaker.
Yes.
And then
that's why I don't think that she's like an Egan. Because she does not seem like she's at the top of the chain.
Right. I don't think she's an Egan either. I was speculating wildly. Maybe it's Helly. Maybe Helly's the Egan. But I did really like how they had the speaker. They did the same joke of like the board's not going to start the conversation, and they were like,
right.
And like they had to tell her like, you have to start it.
Right.
And I liked seeing that she has to deal with the same bullshit that Mark. Yeah, that Mark had to deal with.
Yeah.
Speaking of Miss Selvig, Miss Cobalt, whatever we want to call her.
Cobalt. Thank you. I called her wrong. Yeah.
What do we think about her?
I was thinking that same thing because she seemed genuinely sorry for Mark when she was Mrs. Selvig.
Right. She looked at him and she said, I feel so sorry for you. Or no, I hope you're okay, Mark. I don't know if it was I hope you're okay or like, are you doing okay, Mark? Or something along those lines where it did seem genuine care. The other interesting part about her is we saw a glimpse of her kitchen. Right? We saw that her refrigerator had a bunch of different food things in there, like half wrapped in foil, like doesn't seem very...
It's all kind of leftover food. It's not like there's a bunch of ingredients to make fresh food, so it doesn't seem like she's cooking for herself all the time. It seemed like she's possibly living off of like leftovers from restaurants and, like going to a restaurant, taking the rest of the food home, something like that.
Right. Now, okay, so when she looks at Mark, there was a little picture next to her. I don't know if you saw what it said. It said, "We must be cut to heal." And I'm wondering, what if this, like, we have this malicious intent behind what Lumon is doing? But what if this is actually part of the healing process for Mark? Like, what if this is a way to get him to move on past his wife? We saw a lot of smiles. Lumon serving smiles. We saw tons of smiles.
We saw tons of smiles. I still don't trust this company. What I do possibly think, like just a little bit, that Miss Coble could maybe be good. And here's a wild kind of theory as to why. And it's not like a big one. It's not I feel strongly about this. You can easily sway me.
Okay.
So Petey in Mark's basement, Mark asks him a great question, which he doesn't get to answer because he starts to have one of his flashbacks. And he says that he doesn't want to talk there because he doesn't know if the intercom is on, and he doesn't know if Irving is going to walk in.
He said the consoles, if the consoles were bugged.
The console. Yeah, the consoles were bugged, and if Irving was going to walk in. So what this tells me is that that's the kind of talk, at least the way I perceived it, was that's the kind of talk you have with somebody that you're sharing secrets with. And it doesn't seem like Mark is a conspirator yet. It doesn't seem like Mark is involved in conversation, or at least before this, wasn't like talking secretly about the company. So I don't think he was talking to Mark. And the fact that he said that he didn't know if Irving was going to walk in means that I think that possibly goes against your theory of Irving being the best friend. Right. I did still like that clue of the dirt underneath the fingernails. But so I don't think it's Irving, and he somehow got a hold of a tape, which seems like you would have to have higher up access to get a hold of that. So whether or not that's like a Mr. Milchek, whether or not that's, Miss Coble.
Well, she was in the room with Helly when she was getting tortured.
Yeah. And or whether or not it's a Mr. Grainer. Like, I feel like it would require somebody with like higher access to be able to do that. So I do think that there is somebody else we're going to discover is obviously keeping their cards close to their chest, because they, if you, who knows what this company would do if they found out that you were taking things out somehow.
Right.
Also, like, how would you be able to get out one of those tapes? Think about it. Like, they get wanded with like the metal, so it's like you can't get words out, you can't get metal out because you get wanded. So who are the ones that would be able to do that? I think people like Miss Coble that I don't know if they have like a different entrance, like that key card gives them access to a different elevator.
Right. I think it would have to. But it is also interesting that Miss Cobalt Selvig went to work so much later than Mark. As like the head of the department, you would think that you would be there.
I think she was intending on doing reconnaissance because so Petey is out, and obviously there's worries about like what is Petey doing, and Mark suspiciously takes the next day off after he's told Petey isn't coming back. And so I think that she was already intending on doing reconnaissance. And so that was the whole goal. She literally had to wait for him to leave.
Gotcha. It does seem, though, when I see, like, the Mrs. Selvig that is, looking at Mark, eating her own cookies, the mess of her house, and the way that she, like, was trying to defrost her steps with a hairdryer, versus when you see her, like, in his basement, like, after she's left the house, in his basement, and every time she's at work, she does feel like a different person. I don't know if you've noticed that. So, like, I don't think that she's severed, after seeing things in this episode, but part of me feels like she does feel like a very different character sometimes.
Yeah, it's weird, and I think they'll definitely reveal why this season.
Right.
This definitely seems like a show that does give out a steady stream of answers while it's giving a steady stream of questions. It's not just one of those that just like keeps asking more questions, and you're like, damn it, just give me one answer, please.
I do have a question about Grainer, though. I just thought about. So they always paint Grainer as this like bad guy. Like, you don't want Grainer to do this, you don't want Grainer to do that. You don't want Grainer to get the bad soap, back to that conditioning. Is there really bad soap, or is it just conditioned to be bad soap? But they talk about Grainer being this bad guy, right? But so far, all I've seen Grainer do is escort people places. He escorted Mark to the break room where he went in and met Miss Selvig. And then when Helly went in there, Mailce and her were there. Like, Grainer isn't really doing anything. Like, why is he labeled the bad guy? Just because he delivers people there?
That's a good question. I mean, maybe that's still coming up.
Or maybe he doesn't even exist. Maybe it's an optics thing, and he's conditioned that when you see Grainer, you're going to feel bad.
Right. And they do have, like, that red lighting. That, by the way, the scene that ended with Grainer was absolutely phenomenal. The pacing of this episode had been definitely a little slower than the previous two episodes, I felt. And not in a bad way. But I felt like the pacing was just a little bit slower, still very interesting. And man, when it went from kind of slow all episode long to Helly's missing, it's like a light switch just flipped. And it went from slow pacing to absolutely frenetic. Like, all of a sudden, you know, two of the main characters are running their super fast shots, there's shaky cam.
Right.
The piano is being played, like the pianist is accidentally hitting like multiple notes with a finger, you know, so it's not just dissonance, but it almost sounds kind of like sloppy.
Right.
It really ratcheted up the tension. And so when it ends with, you know, Mark stops her from getting that, from being able to see the note on the outside, so her outie could actually see the note.
Right.
And then you see Mr. Grainer like in red. I felt like this episode was paced out beautifully, and that payoff of that moment was just absolutely perfect.
This show also does it's very stylistic in the way it edits, the way it cuts. Like, watching the Petey delusions, how they will just change, and it still feels like your Petey's there, and that he's in the office, but he's not in the office, and like, you'll see things where you'll see the console in the basement, and just the way that it's quick shots. He's disoriented. It makes you feel disoriented. You don't know what, like, is this a flashback? What's going on? I felt like they used that as a really good tool to effectively show how disoriented he is. As well as the other shot with Mailce as he's starting the interrogation with her. He's this, like, backlit figure, like, almost looking kind of like this holy figure. You know, he has this like light beam in the middle of him. He has the headphones on that almost look like a halo.
Right.
And he just talks in this soft tone of like, read it again. Please do. You know, right. Like, it just, the way that certain scenes that they have, the stylistic choices that they chose were phenomenal.
Which, you know, the last thing I kind of wanted to point out was, like, speaking of, you know, you mentioned something being kind of disorienting. What I thought was interesting is, considering in the first episode especially, they took so much pains to, like, show the clocks, to show, like, how long it takes for things to happen. I thought it was interesting that when everybody came into the office in this episode, it looked like it was almost at the same time, but I also noticed that they were coming in from different doors, which makes me wonder whether or not, even though their routes are timed about 5 minutes apart, that it's still based off of like the routes that they have to take. They end up arriving at the same time. Like, it's that office is almost like a labyrinth in and of itself.
Yeah.
I mean, to the point where like people don't know the scale of the whole office. They don't know how many other departments work there.
Right.
There's apparently a group of people that never leave. Who are these people?
Right. Is that the board? It did seem like there was a way to punish people that they were never allowed to leave. Like, it was almost like you don't ever, like, it's a break room that you never come out of. Now, did you take an in-depth look at that picture of like the maze? Because you're right, it is a labyrinth.
I didn't take a I tried to take a look at it because I don't think I talked about this for the first episode, but I did in that first scene where he first went into the office, the first episode, and we have that jaunty music going on. We see how ridiculous it is for him to get there. I did count the number of steps and look at the turns and map what that route would look like based off of what it looked like, how many steps he took.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a crazy pathway. It basically was like if I smoothed out the shape to make the most common shape possible, it would be about 3/4 of an oval, which means it would be just easier to go the other direction.
Right.
So it's like basically that comes down to like going over a little bit, down a good ways, over a good amount, and then back about halfway. So it's like, why would you not just go the other direction and go down about halfway? Once again, was a little bit more complicated than that because there was a lot of like quick right lefts and stuff like that. But that was the basic shape, which is just really odd. You know, like there has to be a hallway that goes in between.
Right.
There's some weird stuff going on.
Well, looking at the picture in depthly, because I like paused and I wanted to like see where everything was. I wanted to see where he knew where wellness was. There's like a team bond. Oh, we saw the team bonding room, so we saw where that one was on there. He doesn't know, like, there doesn't seem to be any other departments that were listed on there except optics and design, and he can't even place it on the map. So there's like just a floating bubble that says optics and design because he doesn't even know how to get to optics and design. I couldn't find data refinement area on the poster he had, so I don't know if it was just labeled something different. Very interesting stuff. It does look like it winds. I don't know. I don't know what would the point be to make it such a maze down there.
I think they specifically want to keep people apart. They don't want. It's kind of like compartmentalizing. You know, it's like when you're having somebody, a group build a bomb, and you don't want anybody to be able to like go and take that information and make the bomb. So you have everybody kind of specialize, and then that all comes together. That kind of compartmentalization also makes it so that if anybody's like captured, you know, then the enemy won't have all of the information. They'll only have part of it. So it seemed like it was kind of like that same kind of ethos, like down to the fact that if they wanted to do anything outside of the norm, it seemed like they had to fill out paperwork. And my thought process behind that was like, if they can schedule everything, then there shouldn't be a bunch of times when people are like meeting in hallways like they did with O&D. Because it did seem like Mark maybe didn't quite follow the procedures when he took them there. I think Mark was really worried about what Helly was going to do. And so he's like, you know what? She's
a flight risk.
Taking it to the extreme. Exactly. Like, the best bad thing I can do is just to take this trip, even though I haven't necessarily filled out the paperwork.
True. Or
And so it
you
seems
don't
like
have to
he shouldn't have bumped into them.
you don't have to fill out paperwork if you start a coup. Because apparently, I love Dylan with his little mythos of like different things. Like,
Dylan's all over the place.
Yeah, he's talking about there used to be.
He's a bodybuilder. He's
right.
Thinks that they're doing
cleaning the ocean.
Under the sea. Oh
so,
my goodness.
Why I bring up the coup though, he talks about optics and design tried to overthrow the other departments. That's why. Who's the first one? Ker Egan? Is it
Ker Egan? Yeah.
Ker Egan is the first one. He talks about that's why he separated the departments in the first place. So this coup took place, like this revolution of these. Were they severed? Were they not severed? I mean, I can imagine they were severed in 1800s, but
right.
It seems like they've had these like organizations for a while, if we believe what Dylan says. But how does he know?
I think that I don't think that there's necessarily truth. I think that wild theories have spread because there's not a lot of information. Because they keep everybody apart, you know?
Do you think that's why Dylan hates Bert? He doesn't know that he's bad. He's just like, that guy's such a prick. Like, I can't stand him. Like, do you think that he just like kind of came up with this?
It's a weird thing with that relation. I mean, I love it.
I think it's hilarious.
But it was just it was out of nowhere. And they obviously have had interactions before, because in the previous episode, he'd said that, you know, Bert was a bad person. So, I don't know.
But optics...
I'm definitely interested in seeing more.
Optics and design is just a weird group anyway, because, again, it's only two of them. They make that very clear that, like, why is it two of them? It's so weird. And when we see them...
Why do you need team bonding if you have two people?
Right! That's what I was like... And it's like the weirdest thing. Like, we're doing an egg crack contest. Like, what?
Right. Oh, that was the other thing. You think that they successfully did a coup if they can't protect some basic eggs in like an egg drop contest? Like,
they're optics and design. They're not scientists, okay? They're optics and design. Well, I think with that, we're going to have to find out if your theory is correct on the next episode. Episode 4. This is where our journey comes to an end. Let us know what your theories are down in the comments. Thanks a lot for watching. I'm Mark. This is Sterling. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.